I'd like to introduce our moderator. Dr. Jeannie Ross is the Director and Principal Research Scientist at MIT Sloan Center for Information Systems Research. Dr. Ross.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm delighted to be able to moderate this panel because I suspect the rest of you, wonder a lot what I should be doing to make sure I have the right kind of staff and giving them the right kind of training, incentives, development techniques. And I'm happy to say we have three experts here who can speak on that topic. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist, Tammy Erickson, called in sick just a little while ago, so she will not be joining us. But we have some great expertise here to address the issues of the workforce just 4 years out, and essentially what IT has to do with making them more effective. Let me introduce the panelists. I'll start here with Coco Brown. Coco is President and Chief Operating Officer of Taos, an IT services and consulting company based in the Silicon Valley. And as we all know, the Silicon Valley has a wonderful concentration of some of those Gen X and Gen Yers who are becoming entrepreneurs and probably kind of giving us a sense of what we have to look forward to. Coco has helped to grow Taos to a $100 million company with 350 employees that have served over 1,200 companies. She's a leader in the community in the Bay Area, and the Business Journal recently recognized Coco as one of the Silicon Valley's 100 top women of influence in 2010. So welcome, Coco. Next, I'd like to introduce Sean Banerjee. Sean comes to us from Russell Reynolds Associates. They are a professional recruiting organization, so he has another very different perspective to offer us. And he's been providing companies with transformational CIOs. So he's got some interesting insights on what it's going to take for the IT organization to address the needs of our future workforce. Sean is fluent in Bengali, English, and Hindi, which I think makes him particularly well suited to thinking about the workforce issues going forward. So welcome, Sean. And Stephen John is from Workday, which is a cloud services organization that provides HR, finance, and payroll services in the cloud. He's a former CIO as well, most recently at H.B. Fuller Company, a specialty chemical manufacturer. Stephen is an active member of the Society for Information Management and a founding member of the CIO Executive Council. He has frequently been recognized for being an innovative CIO. Welcome, Stephen. So obviously our first interest here is in just trying to understand what the workforce of 2015 is going to look like. And I'm going to start with Coco and ask you, Coco, can you just describe the attributes of Workforce 2015 and what's really different about it? What are the trends that are emerging?
Okay. Good. So I think, first of all, you'll see exaggerated what we're starting to see happening already today. One of the things that I notice both in my own workforce and in our clients is that everyone coming into the workforce today is very self-enabled. And I'm not just talking about the new generations. I mean everyone from all ages of life. We are our own entrepreneurs outside of our quote-unquote day jobs. Lots of people are pursuing their own personal passions and pursuits and creating entrepreneurial endeavors out of that. And we're facilitated by services like Box.net, like Facebook and LinkedIn, like Bright Idea, like Elance. And these make it very, very easy for us to build our own little companies. So when we come into the corporate environment, we expect to be equally self-enabled and often quite independent. A good example of that would be, you look at Salesforce. Salesforce allows me to build all my own reports, all my own dashboards, to create my own views and really have my own little microcosm that allows me to see exactly what I want to see in the way I want to see it and allow me to manage my operation in ways that make sense to me. So that would be an example of that, and I think we're going to need to see more of that. The next thing I would say is that we all know we're all networked. And what I think is kind of missing right now is I don't know that corporations truly understand why we need to be networked, why they're bringing social network into the corporation. It's not a cultural add-on. It's not a fad. It's to a large extent, it's a replacement. email as a tool within the organization is getting an increasingly diminished role because it's not the best communication tool these days. The better communication tools are texting, are IMing, are Facebook connections, and I see this at all different levels again, even to the point of my mother. So, and I heard from one of the people in the audience that her 82-year-old grandmother was also, doing texting her. So if you look at younger people in today's environment, I think they don't even use email. And so I think that's an interesting thing for us to think about for 2014. And it's not really the appropriate document repository for us any longer either, and I think we've been struggling with that for quite some time. The other thing that I'm extremely passionate about from an employee perspective is a lot of our organizations these days are 24/7, 365. They run all the time, which means a good portion of your professional operation is also running all the time. Your management has to be always on. And so the notion that personal things get taken care of during personal time is just a thought of the past. It's not appropriate any longer. What's more appropriate is if you need some of my evenings and my personal time, my family time, I need some of your days. And you have to give that control to the employees directly. It's not for you to control. It's for them to control. And the more you let them figure out what works best for them in terms of how they integrate life and work so that they coexist simultaneously, the more you will get the maximum output from them. People who feel supported will support you. People who feel gypped will gyp you. And I think that's a very important message for 2014, 2015. From a business perspective, I think the savvy businesses are learning and will continue to learn that even your employees are free agents. Last night at the speakers dinner, I got cards from people. Several people came up to me and gave me 2 cards. One was their day job card, and the other was their passion card, what they're doing. So I think it's sort of to my first point, but what the businesses are recognizing about that is it's not important to own the employee. It's important to really have good processes for how you retain and get continuity and knowledge handoff, and how you ensure that you get the result and own the result. But ownership of employees, it's not really all that important any longer. Even and I know I would get some argument from some perhaps this morning, but even at the architecture level, and I'm seeing that even more and more in my own business. You want to, from the CIO's realm, when technology is changing so quickly, do you really want to hold on to those particular experts whose expertise is valuable for you right now, but may become outdated because they can't keep up as quickly as the experts out there who are doing it 100 different times in 100 different places at once? That's an important question to ask ourselves.
Very interesting. I think, I don't know about the rest of you, but that's enough to get my blood pressure up a little bit. Okay. So why don't we turn this over to Sean. Now, you've heard kind of a list here of things that are changing. Talk to us, obviously you're welcome to add to the list, but I think what it also raises is some very interesting leadership challenges. Talk about how we actually are, as leaders, are going to address some of these changes you see taking place.
What? And I have to say, I mean, Coco, you covered a lot of ground there. Our experience is that the workforce of 2015 is really a confluence of 3 primary categories, which I think have been shared today. Chris mentioned it earlier, of the boomers, the Gen Xers, and the millennials. And to be able to manage across these 3 sets and the various subcategories is critical to success, both in respect to leadership as well as management. A lot of this is distilling down the core values that these different groups hold, building an enterprise that reflects those values in order to both attract and retain these individuals, and understanding the underlying motivations that these different groups have at these various life points. So the boomers clearly will be at a different place than the Gen Xers vis-a-vis the millennials, and the way these people work and their expectations for work. Boomers tend to have a more linear view of the workplace and their career. Gen Xers, in many cases, have taken a more empowered approach to their career, whereas the millennials perhaps don't have a free agent attitude towards work, but see the lines between work and their personal lives to be, opaque, if not completely diminished. Providing those individuals with different opportunities and challenges, ability to grow and develop both professionally and personally, that is really the core of leadership for 2015 and frankly beyond. In our conversations with boards of directors, private equity firms, HR professionals, the ability to identify what are those key competencies, what are those drivers and motivators, and craft a strategy around leadership and management that reflects their distinct needs and attributes is perhaps the greatest challenge for leadership in the next 5 to 10 years.
Interesting. It sounds like you're saying we wouldn't want to say I have a leadership style because the likelihood of my leadership style working for all three of these groups is not so great. That in fact you were talking about a strategy for leadership. There's a real difference there?
I think there's a fundamental distinction in respect to leadership styles, and management. Being able to craft a theme around how organizations interact with employees, the symbiosis between these different groups is going to be critical to the ability for the next generation of leadership, again, to identify, attract, and retain that talent. And we believe that retention piece will be absolutely as critical as the identification and attraction piece.
Yeah, you bet. Let's turn to Stephen. As a former CIO, you can sit in the shoes of people who are trying to make sure that people are equipped, both from the leadership perspective and the individuals. What do you think are going to be the unique challenges for the CIO trying to address this changing workforce?
I think I take some of my inspiration from being a father. So if you really want to understand the next generation, look at your teenagers. And that can be very enlightening and that can be very frightening. So I kind of connected with it the first time I was watching my son play Xbox. It took me a little while to realize that he was global. He was playing people in Russia, people in England, people in France, people in the US, different parts of the US. He had a team of people that were working with him to achieve a goal, a virtual team that he knew how to manage and work with and communicate with. I learned very quickly that he's not good at delayed gratification, and teenagers aren't. And I also believe the next generation of workers won't be. If the next zombie map doesn't come out quickly, they will move on to another game. And I think the same will be with our employees. If we're not providing them with challenges, if we aren't providing them with technologies, if we're blocking them from technologies, they will find another way. One example, I've had this conversation with my son. If I wanted to see Animal House, I had to sneak into the theater when I was a teenager. If he wants to see The Hangover, he closes his bedroom door. So, access to technology, they will find a way. They will move around us. Just like it was this next generation that brought Skype into the IT organizations, not the IT organizations. And so we need to watch those. As IT leaders, we need to leverage that. That is a resource, that is a skill set that will help us provide better service. We've spent a lot of time fighting against that stream, and we need to actually embrace it and help leverage it. Now, there needs to be proper governance, there need to be proper controls, but we need to enhance that capability, not fight against it. I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead. I actually, let me go ahead and address that. So the CIO for years has been, I think you called him Dr. No, and you're saying this is not going to be that way going forward. But this is not just the CIO. You're saying that the entire IT organization is going to change the way it thinks. Talk about what you do as an IT leader to make the IT unit a facilitator of the workforce going forward.
Sure. I believe that there are three types of work that we do as CIOs. There's operational work, there's transformational or development or project work, and there's strategic work. And there are three factors that move you from being an operational CIO to being a strategic CIO. The first is business knowledge, the second is credibility, and the third is, and I think this is just emerging, technology. The idea is, and the mantra I used with my team is, if we're doing something that somebody else can do or do better than we can do, then something that only we can do isn't getting done. So the idea is that IT leaders, IT people, have more on their plate than they can handle. So we need to be looking for where we should be focused and what we can let go of. So I think the cloud is providing a way for us to release some of those operational responsibilities. We never give up accountability, but we can give up responsibility. And it's moving us to where we can actually be strategic in how we interface with the business. And that the next generation will be much more adapted to that same idea.
Interesting. And one thing that's clearly emerging, and you mentioned this as well, Coco, is we now have our employees, but we also have all of these services that are external. And I know, Sean, that this is an area that you've done some work with. We are managing an ecosystem, not just employees. Talk about how that expertise is starting to develop now that we've had some experience with an ecosystem rather than employees. And what does this mean in terms of leadership and how we take how we facilitate the needs of our extended family, if you will?
Certainly, and I think Stephen actually touches on some very important points. If we went back as recently as 5-10 years ago, I think the paradigm for a CIO leader was a great operator, someone who could create an IT environment which was akin to a robust functional utility, supporting the ongoing business operations of the enterprise. Today, the premium really is on business strategy, on innovation, contributions that directly impact the desired business outcomes. The CIO leader who's able to map the organization vis-a-vis people, processes, and technology, understanding the inherent workflows and the connectivity across the franchise, that's a imperative in respect to understanding the emerging dynamic within the organization. So, for example, historically, CIO-CFO relationship was viewed as being, the key, if not central one, in many cases because technology was viewed as a vehicle for managing cost and ongoing operations of the business. Today, we view the chief marketing officer relationship as being central to the future of the IT function. The ability to incorporate innovation vis-a-vis the workforce and the home and bring that to bear in new and different ways is in fact happening as we sit here today. And to Stephen's point, understanding how the workers of tomorrow are already interacting and setting up a series of success scenarios so that when they enter the organization, they're already comfortable. The investment in training will reduce as productivity increases because many of these people won't view it as work as much as just an ongoing element of their everyday activities.
Yeah. When you think about the workers of the future, so many of them are going to be not long-term employees, right? They're going to be contractors. They're going to be...
Actually, if I might for a moment, we actually envision two scenarios there.
Go ahead.
We see one of the large enterprise, not to sound Orwellian, but a scenario where through further mergers and acquisitions, you have large global institutions that the company acts almost like country. And frankly, if you look at certain global 50 companies today, their revenues are significantly larger than certain countries. And those organizations will take on almost a social contract with their employee. The employee joins the company, and if there is an implicit understanding of employment for life, there's a belief that at this platform, I can gain different skills, achieve satisfaction professionally and personally, be it international rotations, functional rotations, different experiences that are going to be accretive to building a fulfilling life. And we even have projected that these organizations, through government regulation, will perhaps take on further accountability for the individual in terms of education and healthcare and other elements of one's life. And that's the one scenario, and through M&A, we feel that that will be a world that will likely exist. As a counterpoint to that, though, the world that Coco has described, which is a highly decentralized world where the individual sitting in their home is able to operate a robust, multifaceted global business through partnerships, through exchanges and networks of people that allow them to serve customers all over the world and operate as highly regarded specialists. I would envision a dynamic where individuals have almost an eBay-style rating for their services and can bid out their services in a competitive fashion. E-lancing, creating scenarios where international borders really aren't as important as the ability to actually operate in different theaters. So a Chinese company engaging a European team of bankers to do a deal in Africa. Those are the two worlds that we actually envision going forward. And we're not quite sure what the cross-pollination between those two worlds will be. But one is one where the individual gains satisfaction and is able to make their contributions in kind in a large company dynamic, and the other is perhaps a more entrepreneurial one, but no less fulfilling or compelling in terms of career path. So we don't see this portfolio career of person working for 15 different companies necessarily being pervasive. In fact, some of the surveying we've done debunks that as a perception, the same as the perception of people will no longer work in offices. We think people will, they'll just work differently when they're in those offices because the offices will look and feel different.
Yeah, interesting. So, Coco, you've seen people in Silicon Valley, and I'm curious, do you think they would buy this kind of bifurcation of the work world?
I think so when you think about the very large organizations that he's talking about, but I think for the most part, what I'm seeing increasingly is the ecosystem that you very nicely described, that is the one that is very distributed, where you are working with specialized experts all over the world, and I think even within our own organization, we find the talent where the talent exists, and we work with what it takes to make that talent successful. And it's easy to do that in a world where we're so accessible with Skype and with the internet and with video conferencing. And there's tools out there that allow engineering organizations that need to look at 3D designs together to collaborate across the world to look at these. There's not a lot that we're prevented from doing. So, I think what's going to be challenged in terms of the leadership models is going to be a lot about some of our emotional ties to things like I need to see my employee to believe that there's something going on there. I think the emotional tie to they need to be my employee because I'm so unique. You're not unique. Your environments are very little is unique in your environment, and I can tell you that from looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of environments in the Silicon Valley area, and primarily, infrastructure is infrastructure is infrastructure. It's really your leadership that matters more than anything else, and I think the leadership skills that will matter the most are those of being a great integrator, being a great facilitator. And a good example of this, the CIO of Adobe does, every year, she gets her major partners together and she does a partner briefing. And it's a half-day long event with the second half of the day being an Adobe briefing. And what she does is she opens the kimono completely. This is my organization. This is who's responsible for what. This is exactly where I'm spending money. These are my initiatives. This is what's most important to me. Here's my problems. Here's where I'm struggling. Then they do breakouts. Here, talk to the leader of this domain, talk to the leader of this domain. Oh, this one's a program leader over this major project. Talk to that person. Whatever you think's interesting, go talk to those people. Learn everything that you possibly can about what's going on, and please come help me. And then the second is, would you like to know what Adobe does? Because I care that you care about my products. I care that you're integrated. And I think that I don't see enough of that. And that's an example of a partnering approach, a facilitating and integrating approach to bringing your extended organization into the fold and not being sort of closed.
Very interesting.
May I add
Go
something
ahead.
there? Because actually, Coco brings up a great point, and this is around what we've studied and refer to the one-to-one future of leadership. And that that is a departure from the old model of mass communication within the enterprise, where a voicemail blast goes out or email blast goes out, and at the end of the day, people look at it and say, "It's great to hear from the CEO when she sends out the voicemail." In the new paradigm, the ability to connect with individuals in a one-to-one fashion will be much more powerful in terms of, again, attracting but developing and retaining those individuals, and social networking, particularly internal social networking, the ability for the organization to identify individuals' likes, dislikes, interests, true passion, and then bring that knowledge in an actionable manner to bear in order to connect with that employee, we again believe will be a much more compelling, sustainable model for leadership.
This is really interesting. I want to turn it over to Stephen, because you've been a CIO in more traditional organizations, and at one point, I don't know if she meant it the way she said it, Coco said, and this is easy, and I'm thinking, I'm not so sure about this. I'm really interested in your perspective on that.
What did I say?
This networking thing, it's really easy.
So there's an old IT saying that soft is hard and hard is easy. Servers, data centers, the hard stuff, the physical stuff, that's easy. The soft stuff, people, processes, politics, that's the hard stuff. And so we need to let other people do that physical stuff so that we can focus on the real work, the hard work, which is people, talent management. I was interviewing once in what happens to CIOs in that in-between time. I was a CIO of a joint venture where the parents took their toys and went home, and suddenly there wasn't a joint venture. And I was interviewing for a position as this organization was so large. There was a CIO, and then there were 5 CIOs reporting to him. And I was interviewing for one of those 5 CIO roles, and had gone through a series of interviews. And in the last interview with the key CIO, he asked me at the end of the interview, he said, "What are you most proud of in your career?" And I said, "Jason." I'd worked with this gentleman for a decade in 2 different companies. My first day in that first company, I had interviewed all 250 of my employees. And he was the only one that said, "I would like to be a CIO someday, and I'd like you to help me." And so I'd mentored him and given him challenges, and he'd just grown and met all those challenges. And he was the most I'm more proud of him than anything else in my career. Now, I've implemented ERP systems and on time, on budget, and done, been recognized for X and Y and Z. But I was most proud of that. At the end of that interview, the CIO said, "You're too nice for this company because you gave the wrong answer. It should have been the ERP system and not Jason." And I disagree with that. I think the CIO, I think the leader of the future has to be a mentor. They have to be a leader. They have to help their people grow. It's actually a requirement. I lost track of this for a decade. Early in my career, I always looked for a leader that I could learn from, that would help me grow, that was interested in helping me grow. And again, I'm back into that mode where I won't work for somebody unless they're interested in helping me grow.
Yeah, great point. This is a good time for us to open it up to the audience. If we have some questions, we have 2 microphones, and I encourage you to approach the microphones. As you do that, I must say that as you were speaking, I'm reminded of my 27-year-old daughter who called me recently and said, "I am not being managed well." And I thought, it never occurred to me to say that when I was 27, although it was probably just as true. So I think some of the things you're describing here are quite apropos to that statement. There? Well, then I'll go ahead and put another one forward. A number of you have started to raise this issue of we have a blurring, if you will, between private time and work time, and that's going to require some different management techniques. Let's talk a little bit more of that, because one thing that is going on here, and Sean, you mentioned we have 3 different groups out there, and the values that you mentioned for the boomers was to try to separate that, and that's been pretty frustrating in recent years for those of us who continue to try to do that. What do you think will be different about how you manage in a world in which you're recognizing that the boundaries between personal life and work life will be different? How does that change how you work with your people? You want to go right? Yes. Why don't you start off, Coco?
Well, I think it's going to be very, very important that you figure out how to measure results. I think we spend a lot of time measuring activity, and I think we mistake activity for result or for productivity. And I think it's going to be extremely important to lay out good terms with your employees about what it is that you need and by when, and then to give them some flexibility about how they get there. I think that's just a necessary. If you look at the workforce of today, a little over 50% of the high-paid professional position, management and individual contributor positions, are held by women. And women and men are truly dual income earners, right? And this has been going on for some time now, but they're both very career oriented, very career minded, very much wanting to build their careers. And it's a constant state of negotiation. Will you pick up the kids today because I have a meeting? Will you're constantly negotiating. There's no longer the traditional male role, female role. You have to blend those two and live together. And if we understand that as an organization, we have to come to the understanding as well that you can't have the person without having their family at this point, right? Because nobody is at home taking care of those kids. They will suffer if we do not allow the employees in our organization to create their own flexibility for how they manage and integrate life with work. And just one other point I'll make to that is I host a Women in IT Leadership dinner once every 45 days or so. And there's about 60 women or so. There's CIOs, they're executives. And inevitably, when we get together, we will have a topic that we want to talk about that's really related to our jobs or, poignant in the day for what's going on in the industry. But inevitably, we'll get back to this whole conversation of how do I integrate my life and my work? How do I do that?
Yeah. This is interesting. She's from the Silicon Valley, so I don't know if we have to believe everything she says. I just find this exhausting.
I'll send you my data source.
I just find this idea exhausting. I mean, so we have to worry about our lives, our personal lives and our professional lives, and we have to worry about all our employees' professional and personal lives, and we have to worry about all of our extended ecosystems, personal and professional lives. I mean, how do we do this without just exhausting ourselves?
Well, I think HR tools have lagged behind. So they've been at the periphery, and so they haven't been at the core. They don't generate revenue per se. And so I think they've lagged behind. I think we're seeing a resurgence in that area around talent management and other tools that are helping us provide some of that skill. Collaboration tools, those types of things are now coming to the forefront. So I think technology is catching up, but the human side is also lagging behind.
I do think it's exhausting. I think being a global CIO is one of the toughest jobs in the world. I think the pace of business, the demands of the different constituents, both internal to the enterprise as well as with the increasing role that the CIO is playing with external customers, the internationalization of business, not just that your company serves markets and customers globally, but your ability to partner with vendors and other service providers that may have resources sitting in different time zones and in different geographies. It's a tremendously exhausting and stressful undertaking. That said, there are better tools that one can avail oneself of. At the same time, there's a prioritization and a bit of a shift in that the old operating CIO, the metrics, we talk about metrics, was typically budget and headcount. How many people am I responsible for? How much money do they spend on IT? We've seen a precipitous change in that. The CIO, the contemporary CIO, the more progressive organization, it's not about measuring budget and headcount, it's measuring business contribution through, it could be revenue growth, it could be it could be profitability, it could be customer satisfaction, there's internal polls, there are external surveys, but it's now the ability to manage these different partners, align the interests of the organization with these partners in order to generate the results you need. That's what allows you to focus on being a strategic contributor to the business as opposed to being bogged down in the minutia of the everyday operation. But it is exhausting. It's one of the things that we speak about with CIOs regularly is trying to balance this, trying to stay energized. The constitution of a CIO is, it's akin to being a professional athlete in terms of the demands that are placed on you mentally and physically these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I just know noticed that there are people out there. So sorry. Can we go ahead and take a question from the audience?
Sure. My name is Mark Hall. I'm with a company called Experian. I'm a former CIO turned entrepreneur, and I'm doing a startup company based in Massachusetts, and we're 100% virtual, no office, everything's in the cloud. It's kind of a cool place to be. There's been a lot of research on the future of work that Tom Malone and other academics have done around the democratization of the workforce, and the old structure of command and control of kind of company hierarchy is there's a sense that over time it's going to begin to disintegrate, and you can begin to see that. And I'd like to hear your comments about that. And the ultimate question is, who's actually working for whom in an organization, and how does command and control structures work anymore?
Why don't you take that?
Well, I would say two things about that. One, I think that is the way to, in part, make this not exhausting, is you have to distribute ownership. You have to distribute responsibility back to your employees for themselves. And this sort of command and control, I agree in some ways with Brian this morning when he was talking about the organization of the future is really a collective. It's more of it's more of an ecosystem where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, because you're not simply saying this is the management chain and I've got one at the top and 5 here and another 15 there. And it's not like that, or it shouldn't be like that any longer. I think about my own organization, and what I see over time evolving within the executive leadership team at Taos is that we have functional ownership over certain things, but when it comes down to a particular initiative or a particular change in the organization that I need to make, I sometimes will take that change or initiative that logically looks like it should fit over here and put it over here because the leader over here has the particular skill I need at that time. And they collaborate and they work across each other, and it's increasingly becoming blurred who works for who. And my job is a facilitator. That's what my job is. I should facilitate their ability to work together as a collaborative team, to not have silos. I think that's an extremely important thing to think about as a CIO, is this siloed between domains, infrastructure versus applications. There's all sorts of silos you can create in the organization, and you can create them through all the different organizational models that you implement. There's so many of them out there. But what you really have to do is find a way to create work teams that really work cross-functionally and leverage skills, not just titles, role titles of individuals. I think that'll help a lot.
Have you seen other people? I mean, you mentioned the CIO of Adobe just opening the kimono saying, okay, let me be very clear about what I'm trying to do here so that everybody can get on board and accept some ownership. Are there other leaders, Stephen, Sean, that you've seen that really start to model the ability to bring all these pieces together and push the decision-making out?
Absolutely. I think there are 4 key things a CIO needs to be able to do. They need to have business acumen, they need to have passion, they need to have great communication skills, and they need to have foresight and ambition on behalf of the organization. And that's what we've really been talking about here today, is how do they have foresight and ambition on behalf of that workforce, the future organization, and structuring it so that it can work, because it's not just employees that are part of our teams anymore. We outsource people, we outsource processes, we outsource systems, we outsource platforms, and it's that ecosystem, as you mentioned, that you're managing and getting to function at its highest level. That's the key.
Thank you. I think there was a question over here.
My name is Debbie Burke, and I work on leadership development, often with technologists. And so one of my questions is, as you describe this world in which people are in different countries and cultures and companies and freelancing and so on, but they come together to work on specific projects, how do they get to know each other? What have you found that works best so that they can learn how to trust each other so the project comes out the way you expect it to come out?
Great question. Any of you have experience with that, bringing these diverse and distributed teams together?
Well, I mean, maybe it's my son would probably refer to as old-fashioned, but I still like to bookend. So I like them to get them together physically at the beginning and physically at the end, and then that gives them a way to interface in the middle. Maybe you don't need that, but they need the tools, the collaboration tools, or that SharePoint or whatever you have, where they can communicate, they can see each other, they can talk, they can connect, they can share information, and all that has to be seamless and easy. And so if we're not providing them the tools to do it, to be honest, they'll find it their own way. They'll use Dropbox or Evernote or however they're going to connect with each other out there.
I would say that what I've seen to work is you have to, it's not that they don't all want the same result or that they don't understand what the result is it's supposed to be. It's that when you go off to your own little enclave, you sort of do your own thing, and these things can be in contradiction with one another. So what you really have to do is get together frequently. You have to have an environment. It doesn't have to be physical, but you have to have an environment where you're constantly engaging with each other, even if it feels like maybe you don't need to today. And I think where there's sort of a rapid process that needs to get done, daily check-ins, where it's just a phone call. What are you working on? What are you doing? And everybody's on that call together. As an executive team, we get together half a day, depending on what's going on. It can be a full day every month. Even if it feels like, wow, that's overkill, it gives us a chance to actually truly talk through all the things that are going on in the organization and to cross-pollinate in the organization and to make sure that we're wrestling with future problems. Because when we meet weekly for an hour in staff meeting, it's ridiculous. All that is just the issue of the moment that we're dealing with and some nitpick thing that somebody's arguing with somebody else over, and it's not truly collaborating and working together. So I think that's, at the leadership level, that's one thing to do, and at the group level, I would make it happen. Dynamic, constant conversation and connection.
At the risk of sounding and feeling very old-fashioned, that sounds like a timeless kind of response to this problem, because it's a very human issue how people connect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great never-ending issue. I think that's really true. We still have to focus on how we develop trust, and some of those are old truths, not necessarily new ones.
Trust happens through actual relationship, right? Yeah. That's where trust is built.
Excellent.
Good afternoon, folks. I'm Steve Bigelow. I'm the Senior Technology Editor with SearchDataCenter.com, and you've said some great words about the changing workforce and what we should expect into the future. And I'm just kind of curious if you could maybe give us your sense of what changes, if any, you might see in educational processes. How do you see a technology workforce preparing themselves with college, with technical school, with hands-on experience? How do you see the workforce preparing themselves for technology jobs in the future that might be different than some of the more traditional paths that we're familiar with?
Sean, does your firm do any of this?
Well, we don't, but we work with any number of organizations that have undertaken this. And some of this has been around for a long time. If you go back to the old General Motors Institute or Chubb Institute, organizations that essentially created educational or academic bodies and forums to develop and train their workers. With the kind of rise of liberal arts education, that perhaps wasn't as viewed as compelling an educational proposition, but we are seeing organizations returning to that sort of model. You're seeing companies partner with for-profit educational companies, the Phoenixes, the Kaplans, the DeVrys of the world, to create curriculum geared specifically towards educating their workers. You're seeing academic and corporate collaboration, where companies are funding specific programs in order to, again, develop specific skills and competencies for their workers of the future. We believe that will continue. We're actually starting to hear some rumblings, believe it or not, particularly in Asia at the moment, though, of organizations getting into this at very young ages, 15, 16-year-olds, people who are being identified at the secondary school level and being recruited almost like an apprenticeship model in baseball or soccer in Europe, where they're being pulled in and being developed and trained in order to have these specific skills and attributes and experiences. And one might argue that this is simply another iteration of vocational training, but we feel that because of the private sector involvement, this is something that needs to be watched very carefully and will likely, in the next, we don't know if it's 2015, but certainly by 2020, will likely be a material factor in respect to how people are educated and trained, and again, recruited and retained, because you're locking them in that much earlier in terms of their identification with the organization.
So you're kind of hoping for both company support here and for educational support well down the...
And there will be a government element to this as well.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have actually an example. It's actually an area of disappointment, but there are some great nuggets where things are working really well. I happened to have lunch today with someone from Northeastern University, and he was talking about, he's the dean of I think it's the computer sciences program, but he was talking about how he's got a group of his students working to develop a program that will allow the nurses and practitioners all over the world to help, and midwives, to help diagnose what's going on with a premature baby and deal with that baby really quickly and right now. And he's interacting with the nursing school, and his students are engaged with the nursing school, and the nursing school is giving them the enthusiasm and excitement to understand how they can take the skills they're learning in college and practically apply them to the real world. It's a great example. And Santa Clara University hired someone from industry, a technology leader, an executive who has lots of contacts in the Valley, to be the person who manages the internship program out into the Valley organizations, because what suffers is it's not that they don't have internship programs, it's marketing that program to the company.
And yesterday when we were talking, it became clear that on the one hand, we're worried about technology skills and how we're going to develop those, but we're also worried about the increasing demands for just smart people who can do data analytics and take ownership of the kind of problems you were talking about. What's the role of people sitting on this panel and the people in this audience to make sure those skills are developed starting from whatever age you think they need to start being developed?
I'm going to build on one of Coco's ideas where there's something I'm a little disappointed in, and I teach an IT leadership class in New York City, and it's got strong, up-and-coming, emerging CIOs, as I refer to them, from Pfizer and Kraft and Johnson & Johnson and Chubb and Rockefeller Group and Ford Foundation. But what amazes me is and the companies make a significant investment in sending them to this class. It's through the Society for Information Management. And we meet over a year, 2 days every other month, and we read 30 books. We have 2 CIOs every time coming to speak to us. But what amazes me is the companies are making these investments, but in their day-to-day operations, they're making so many mistakes to discourage these people. So as we get into discussions with these IT leaders, it's not that they don't have the talent or capability or desire. It's that their companies, the politics within the companies or how things are being handled are driving them away. And it's amazing to me how many are looking at recruiters when obviously there's interest in them and their career, else they wouldn't be there. Yet the right hand does the right thing and the left hand does the wrong thing.
Absolutely. Better take another question here.
Hi, François Bélanger from PSP Investment in Montreal. According to Gartner, about 50% of transactions will be done in the cloud in 2015. So my question to you is that about up to 60 and 70% of people in most IT organizations manages the infrastructure and the evolution. So what have we learned as an IT industry since the first, I would call it an outsourcing wave, because it resembled that, and since that we could apply to help our team make the transition and even accelerate the transition if possible?
So you're particularly concerned with how the skill requirements are changing for you.
And helping those people grow. It goes back to education, but these people are been doing their job for a number of years now.
Absolutely.
I'll answer that because I've been through that and pushed a lot of cloud initiatives. I think there are a whole set of new skills that are going to be developed. I think the first is due diligence work. Now maybe some of us have developed that around M&A activity, but as we move into the cloud, your ability to do that due diligence work, I refer to it as the prenuptial agreement, to understand how that relationship will end before it begins, to go out there and make sure that they do disaster recovery better than you do, that they do security better than you do, that they do testing and quality assurance better than you do. that they are remaining certified, and that they encrypt your data in a certain way and all these things. So that due diligence work becomes a new skill set. I think integration becomes a bigger part of who we are as we develop these larger ecosystems. And our architects change. They're not connecting servers, they're connecting clouds, they're connecting on-premise to the cloud. It becomes kind of a different role than it has been in the past, a deeper, bigger role, less detailed, server to server, and more global in its nature. So I think some new jobs are emerging. And some people, I think, will just transition who they work for as opposed to what they do. So if they don't work for me, they'll work for my service provider in the cloud. And so I think some of that will shift. And what will be retained within the organizations are the people that are really business focused. I think shadow IT or skunkworks is an indication that we have not been focused enough on the business. What we need is IT facilitated innovation, replacing skunkworks or shadow IT that grow up within companies because we're not meeting our responsibilities.
I think that you're going to see, I think it's sort of piggybacking here, but I think that you're going to see those people that have been in traditional IT environments are either going to move into where IT is truly part of the revenue stream, e-commerce kinds of environments, or they're going to move into the cloud provider environments. But you'll retain, ultimately, a lot of those people you won't retain, and that's just natural evolution. Those people will go where their skill sets will still be needed. I guess that's my point. Their skill sets will still be needed, but not by you. They'll be needed by the cloud providers themselves, or they'll be needed by the e-commerce providers who do private cloud, who have their own infrastructure they're still retaining, right? And you may, it depends on what you put, how cloud you go. You may still retain the management yourself.
I tend to agree with both your points, but the problem is the transition to there. I mean, I know, they don't see, but we have to make them understand. And one of the things we're looking at is there's a lot of discussion about private cloud. Private cloud just means automate your own data center in a sense, if you look at it. And we're trying to implicate them so they learn the technologies. They're all technology freaks, so they like to use the technology. It's part of the business. That's what we've been asking them for years. It's normal. So we're involving them in private markets, private data center and private cloud initiatives to make them enable. But it's still, the transition will be the challenge, much more than the outcome. I agree with the outcome of the transition. And if we always have the crowd saying, no, it's not good, it's slowing down the business in some sense and not bringing the effect. So
You
my
can just
question
send
is
them
more
to me
about
and
the
I'll hire
transition.
them, and then you'll feel better.
That should work. Thank you.
I think your point, this is not going to be painless.
No.
It's very true.
Yeah,
It's very true.
it was not painless the first time.
Yeah,
but-
thank you.
But I believe, I'm just going to add to that quickly, at the end of the day, we can help in that transition, but at the end of the day, everybody owns their own career, and they need to be looking down the road and seeing when that transition point will come for them and their skill set.
Let's take another question.
It seems to me that there's one important element of this environment that you're talking about, of the future, working environment of the future, that you haven't discussed, and I don't know if that's because you haven't encountered it perhaps in the same way I have, or it's just not really relevant to the conference in quite the same way, but what I'm thinking about is the labor laws, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Family and Medical Leave Act, and on and on and on. You can't have, in a business, you can't have an intern come in for the summer and not be paid. Even if you would want to give that kind of experience to young people, you're not permitted to do it by the Department of Labor. Electronic Arts thought that it had a whole bunch of people who were salaried people, and turned out that many of them were hourly after the state of California got done with them, and they ended up having to move quite a lot of their business, rearrange their business very dramatically as a result of that. Having people work at home if they're hourly individuals, and sometimes you don't really know if they are or not, is a real bookkeeping issue that and a very practical level that the HR people have to know how to answer when the time comes. The same thing about the difference between an independent contractor and an employee. The IRS and the Department of Labor want very, very much to not have independent contractors and force people to be employees with benefits and health insurance and so forth. Have you all not talked about that because you aren't encountering these things the way I have in my business, or is it just not really relevant to the conference here? Or it seems to me that's a critical element of what's going to transpire in this transformation that you've talked about with the workforce.
Well, we probably haven't mentioned it because we're not sure we know the answer to it. And the U.S. isn't even the biggest issue. If you go to Germany and have to deal with the Work Council, that's a whole nother level of complexity there. It is a reality that we have to deal with that, especially in the global economy. And it will be a reality about where the work goes in the future. So countries have to deal with it. So probably the connection that needs to be made is between corporate world and the governmental world, and how we make that work and simplify it, maybe even at some level standardize it. Because it is a determining factor in where we will put factories, where we will put employees, and where we will do business in the future.
I can't speak to all of it, but I can speak to a little bit of it. The government, it's not that they don't want you to have 1099 employees or contract employees, it's that they don't want to not get paid taxes, and they don't want employees to be treated unfairly. So what they're looking for is for organizations to demonstrate that if they are providing temporary work to them or consulting work to them, that provider has equal benefits to the organization that they're working with, so that the employee can't say, I'm just being taken for a ride here, they're just hiring me only so that they can avoid paying all these benefits. No, the person's getting their benefits from their other provider. Or also making sure that they carry the proper tax ID and insurances that they're supposed to carry, right? So as long as your contingent labor works under that structure, you're fine. The other thing is that I think if I don't know how to address the question of people taking the leaves that federal and state law have allowed them to take. I do think that it's increasingly becoming important to have a flexible model, to be able to flexibly bring people in and out of the organization and maintain, like I said before, maintain a control over or a focus on how you transfer knowledge and get continuity of knowledge, not so much on who that individual person was. And I think that's going to be the key.
Certainly something else to bear in mind. So I think we are running up here against our deadline. And I would like to take this opportunity to just thank our panelists for a very provocative, certainly just the tip of the iceberg in terms of addressing the workforce issues that lay ahead. But thank you for being here with us, and let's all join in thanking the panelists.